Before you scroll past this, stop for a second because what you are about to read is not just another celebrity update. It is the moment everything people thought they understood about Soo Kai and Tan Songyun suddenly shifted in a way no one expected. And if you stay with the story until the very end, you will understand why a simple apology after deleting every trace of their past online turned into one of the most talked about fictional entertainment moments. So stay until the end because this unfolds in a way that slowly builds into something no one saw coming. It did not begin with an apology. It began with silence. The kind of silence that does not feel empty, but intentional. A silence that follows action, so sudden that people do not even know how to interpret it at first. Because one morning, fans woke up to something unusual. Everything that connected Soo Kai and Tan Songyun online had changed. Posts that once held shared memories were gone. Images that once sparked conversations had disappeared. Even small digital traces people used to revisit were no longer there. At first, no one understood it. Some thought it was a platform issue. Some thought it was a cleanup for new projects. Some refused to believe it meant anything deeper. But the internet has a way of noticing absence faster than presence. And soon, what was missing became louder than what remained. Soo Kai did not respond immediately. Not publicly. Not through any formal statement. Not in a way that clarified anything. And that silence created more questions than answers. Tan Songyun also remained quiet. Not reacting. Not commenting. Not stepping into the growing conversation around them. And that silence between both names became the center of attention. Because when two people once linked in memory suddenly remove every visible connection, people do not just notice it, they try to explain it. And explanations quickly turned into theories. Some believed it was professional separation. Some believed it was personal distance. Some believed it was simply timing. But none of those theories felt complete. Because something about the way it was done felt intentional. Not chaotic. Not emotional. But deliberate. Days passed like that, with the internet filling gaps neither of them had spoken about. Until the moment everything shifted again. Soo Kai finally spoke, but not in the way people expected. There was no long explanation, no defensive statement, no attempt to control the narrative. Instead, there was something much more unexpected. An apology, simple in structure, but heavy in meaning. He acknowledged what people had already noticed. The removal of shared posts. The sudden absence of visible connection. And instead of avoiding it, he addressed it directly. Not with distance, but with responsibility. He said he was sorry. Not because everything that happened was wrong, but because of how it appeared to everyone watching from the outside. And that distinction mattered more than people realized, because it showed awareness that actions in silence still create noise. But what shocked fans even more was what came after. He did not ask for attention. He did not ask for sides. He did not fuel speculation. Instead, he asked for something simple. Peace. Not as a trend. Not as a public statement strategy. But as a genuine desire to let things settle. To allow distance without drama. To let time do what explanation could not. At that moment, everything changed again. Because apology alone would have been expected. But apology paired with a request for peace created a completely different emotional weight. Tan Songyun's reaction was not immediate. And that delay itself became part of the story. Because silence, once again, carried meaning. Behind the scenes, those close to the situation described the atmosphere as reflective rather than tense. Not conflict, but reconsideration. As if both sides were now aware that something had shifted permanently, not in a destructive way, but in a defining one. Fans, however, continued to dissect every detail. Every deleted post became a symbol. Every absence became a question. Every lack of response became a theory. But what they were missing was something simpler. Not everything that disappears is erased with emotion. Sometimes it is reorganized with intention. And sometimes people step back not to reject a past but to protect their present. A few days later, Tan Songyun finally responded in her own way. Not through a statement, not through public explanation, but but through calm acknowledgement in tone and behavior that suggested she had accepted the shift rather than resisted it. There was no visible anger, no emotional confrontation, only quiet distance that matched the request for peace in a way that did not amplify tension. And in that quiet alignment, something unexpected happened. The noise began to lose momentum, not because people stopped caring, but because there was nothing left to escalate. No conflict to feed. No argument to expand. Only a situation that had already resolved itself internally before the public ever fully understood it. In the days that followed, Su Kai remained consistent with his approach. No further statements. No emotional reversals. Just stillness. And Tan Songyun also remained steady in her silence. Not reacting to speculation. Not feeding interpretation. Just continuing forward in her own direction. What remained between them was no longer defined by visible connection or public interaction, but by distance that had been acknowledged rather than denied. And that distinction changed everything. Because when distance is acknowledged, it becomes respect rather than conflict. Weeks later, fans who were still watching closely began to notice something subtle. The absence that once felt loud had softened. Not because anything was restored, but because nothing needed to be forced into explanation anymore. The story had reached its natural emotional endpoint without needing dramatic closure. No reunion moment. No confrontation scene. No final clarification. Just a quiet settling of energy that once felt unsettled. And that is where the real meaning of everything became clear. Sometimes the most shocking moments are not the ones filled with conflict. They are the ones where people choose restraint instead of reaction. Where silence is not confusion, but decision. Where apology is not about reversal, but understanding impact. And where peace is not declared loudly, but requested quietly and respected even more quietly. In the end, what remained was not the deleted posts, not the speculation, not the public reaction, but a simple realization that not every connection must be constantly visible to still be understood in its own time and space. And now, the only question left is this. When something meaningful disappears from view without explanation, do you assume it is gone, or do you accept that some things are simply no longer meant for public display? If this story kept you till the end, then you already know this was never just about deleted posts. It was about how silence, apology, and peace can sometimes tell a deeper story than words ever could. The silence that followed Su Kai's apology was different from the silence before it. It was no longer confusion. It was reflection. Because once something is spoken openly, even softly, it changes the weight of everything that comes after it. Su Kai did not try to follow up his apology with more explanations. He did not add extra words. He did not attempt to reshape what people were already interpreting. Instead, he stepped back from the noise completely, not as avoidance, but as restraint. A decision to let things settle rather than expand. And in that space, something unexpected began to happen. The tension that once surrounded the situation slowly started to lose its sharp edges. Not because questions disappeared, but because answers were no longer being forced into the conversation. Tan Songyun remained quiet during this period, not reacting publicly, not feeding the growing speculation, just continuing her work and presence with calm consistency. And that silence, paired with Su Kai's restraint, created a shift that many fans did not expect. Because when both sides stop escalating a situation, the situation eventually stops escalating itself. But what fans did not see was what was happening behind that quiet surface. Su Kai was not indifferent. He was careful. Every action after that moment was measured, not to repair image, but to prevent misunderstanding from growing further than it already had. The request for peace he made earlier was not forgotten. It became the direction he chose to follow. Meanwhile, Tan Songyun's response was not spoken. It was understood through distance. A distance that was not cold, but structured. Like two people choosing not to disturb something fragile while it is still settling. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, what once felt like a viral emotional storm began to fade into a quieter memory. Not erased, not forgotten, but no longer active in the way it once was. Then came the moment that quietly closed everything, not with a statement, not with a confrontation, but with a realization. Sukai and Tan Songyun were never pulled apart by one event alone. It was never just deleted posts, or one apology, or one request for peace. It was the accumulation of perception, pressure, and interpretation from outside forces that turned a simple situation into something heavier than it originally was. And once that understanding settled in, everything that followed felt different. More grounded, less reactive, more aware. One evening, Sukai was seen in a calm setting, not speaking about anything related to the situation, but visibly more at ease than before. Not because everything was fixed, but because everything that needed to be said had already been said. And now silence was no longer pressure. It was space. Tan Songyun, on her side, continued forward with the same steady composure she had maintained throughout. Not acknowledging the speculation, not reopening the conversation, just moving forward without carrying unnecessary weight. And that became the quiet ending of the entire situation. No dramatic reunion. No public reconciliation moment. No final explanation that tied everything neatly together. Just two people choosing distance over distortion, clarity over confusion, and peace over performance. Because sometimes the most meaningful resolution is not when everything is restored, but when nothing more needs to be explained. And what remains is understanding without noise. And that is where this story finally settles. Not in conflict, not in closure built for attention, but in acceptance that some moments are not meant to be endlessly interpreted. They are meant to be understood once, and then allowed to rest. And now the only thing left is perspective. When a situation becomes louder than the people inside it, do you believe the story belongs to the noise or to the silence that follows after it? Because in the end, what Sukai and Tan Songyun showed was not separation. It was restraint. And sometimes restraint is the quietest form of respect that people do not notice until everything else has faded.